Hello and welcome to Sleepsmyth, your peaceful place to unwind, dream, and drift gently into sleep. Before we start our story tonight, let me help you settle in with a simple, calming breath like a gentle lullaby for your body and mind. So, find a cozy spot, maybe snuggle under your blanket, and softly close your eyes. Now, breathing quietly through your nose for 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold that breath softly for 7 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And now, slowly exhale through your mouth for 8 seconds, letting all the tension melt away. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's do that again. Nice and easy. Breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. One last time, just like a soft whisper, breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Feel your body getting lighter, your mind quiet, as if you're being tucked gently into a calm, warm bed. Thank you for sharing this moment with Sleepsmyth. Now, relax completely and let the story carry you into a peaceful, restful sleep. Let's begin.
Beneath the vaulted ceilings of the empire, where banners flutter and incense lingers, crowns have always been more than ornament. They are instruments of destiny. Thrones are forged in ceremony and steel, and the halls of monarchy hum with the careful weight of allegiance and ambition. Only those who dare can seize what is not freely offered. Tonight, we follow the lives of 3 women who did not wait for the crown. They claimed it, molded it, and commanded the loyalty of empires with intellect, will, and courage. These are sovereigns who reshaped the dynasties they inherited, proving that authority is not given, but taken. First, Empress Regnant Irene Sarantapechaena of Byzantium. Born into an Athenian noble family, she entered Constantinople not as a ruler, but as a consort and mother. The currents of court intrigue and the imperatives of survival drew her toward the pinnacle of authority. Through careful alliances and decisive actions, she removed rivals, even her own son, to claim sole dominion over the Byzantine Empire. Next, Pharaoh Cleopatra VII of Egypt. The final scion of the Ptolemaic dynasty, Cleopatra inherited a realm under threat and a court rife with intrigue. Multilingual and politically astute, she negotiated with Rome's mightiest leaders, secured her son's place as heir, and fought to preserve Egypt's sovereignty. Cleopatra did not bend to empires. She made emperors follow her. Finally, Zetian, the woman who became Emperor of China. Beginning as a concubine within the Tang court, she navigated palace politics, cultivated loyalty, and mastered both ritual and strategy to ascend above every expectation. As regent and later sole emperor, Wu Zetian transformed the Tang dynasty, elevating merit above lineage and demonstrating that authority flows from vision as much as birthright. These three queens illuminate the apex of ambition, the architecture of authority, and the sharp thorns that accompany the crown. Through alliances forged and battles waged, they carved names into history, ruling not in waiting, but in action. Tonight, we journey through gilded palaces, sunlit courts, and sprawling empires, tracing the footsteps of women whose sovereignty was absolute, whose strategy was unmatched, and whose courage remains etched into the annals of monarchy. Prepare to witness ambition made flesh, crowns claimed by intellect and will, and the indelible mark of queens who refused to wait and chose instead to reign. Empress Regnant Irene Sarantapechaena of Byzantium, the empress who dared to rule alone. Athenian roots and early life. Beneath the warm Mediterranean sun, where olive groves whispered with the wind and the city of Athens shimmered like a distant jewel, a girl was born into the Sarantapechaena's family. Her early life unfolded in a world that was both ordinary and quietly noble, a life framed by stone courtyards, sunlit gardens, and the rhythmic cadence of the city beyond. Though her family was not of imperial blood, their lineage carried weight in the Byzantine provinces, and their connections to Constantinople hinted at the possibility of influence far beyond Athens. Irene's childhood was both tender and purposeful. Her father, a man of measured wisdom, taught her the importance of observation, the value of knowledge, and the subtle dance of reputation. Her mother, graceful and attentive, instructed her in the domestic arts, in manners, in the cultivation of a presence that would serve her in a world governed by appearances and politics. Even as a child, Irene noticed more than she let on. The silent exchanges between family members, the carefully measured words of visitors, the flicker of approval or disdain in the eyes of those around her. Every detail became a lesson in understanding human nature, in reading the currents that could lift or sink ambition. Education arrived in the form of tutors, bringing parchment and ink into quiet chambers. She learned to read the histories of emperors, generals, and saints, to write with steady hand, to pray with reverent attention, but also to discern strategy in the recorded deeds of rulers, to see ambition and consequence entwined in every act of power. These lessons, though gentle, shaped her early perception of the world, a world where intellect and perception could carve a path through holes dominated by men. The city itself offered a quiet theater of observation. Market squares buzzed with merchants, soldiers passed along cobblestone streets, and the distant sound of bells from churches marked the rhythm of civic life. Irene watched closely, memorizing the ebb and flow of influence, noting who commanded respect and who merely followed it. Athens, though provincial compared to Constantinople, became the first stage on which her mind trained itself in attention, patience, and discretion. Her adolescence was marked by the whispers of opportunity and the careful shaping of reputation. Noble families spoke of alliances and marriages, of futures tied to service at court. Irene, perceptive and deliberate, understood that her own life could extend far beyond these olive-drenched hills if she moved with thought and care. She observed her peers, learning both their charms and their limitations, and considered the ways in which intellect and grace could be wielded as instruments of influence. Even in play and leisure, she absorbed lessons that would serve her later. The rustling of leaves, the cadence of wind across the hills, the quiet presence of servants and neighbors, all became part of her understanding of subtle dynamics. Every smile, every gesture, every carefully weighed word etched itself into memory. Her early life was a classroom of the senses, teaching her not only what to see, but how to see, not only what to hear, but how to listen. And in the quiet hours of night, as the sun slipped behind the distant hills and the city grew hushed, Irene would lie awake, imagining the world beyond Athens. Not the ordinary world of daily tasks, but a grander one, halls of marble, gilded ceilings, political intrigue, and power that could be seized with intellect, patience, and courage. Though she could not yet know the shape of her destiny, the earliest stirrings of ambition were already present, gentle and insistent, like the first buds of spring pushing through the soil. Athens gave her roots. Her family gave her lessons in observation, tact, and foresight. And the world, far beyond the hills of her childhood, waited with the quiet inevitability of history for her arrival. Irene, child of a noble house, unaware yet of the throne that would one day be hers to claim, dreamed quietly of a life that would stretch far beyond the olive grove she called home. Marriage into the imperial house. The voyage from Athens to Constantinople was long and measured, each wave of the Aegean Sea carrying Irene toward a destiny she could sense but not yet see. The ship cut through the water with quiet determination, and the rising sun painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. Each morning, distant islands appeared like silent guardians, reminding her that the world was vast, filled with both beauty and hidden trials. She watched the horizon with quiet wonder, feeling a flutter of anticipation that mingled with the steady rhythm of her heart. Constantinople rose from the waters like a vision of splendor. Its domes glimmered in sunlight, walls of stone and marble gleamed like polished dreams, and the Golden Horn curved around the city, holding its treasures close. Every tower, every gilded icon, every mosaic reflected centuries of power and devotion, and Irene felt the weight of history settle softly on her shoulders. She stepped onto the docks with cautious grace, aware that the world she had known in Athens, serene and familiar, had already begun to recede behind her. Her marriage to Leo, the son of Emperor Constantine V, marked her entry into a world both dazzling and treacherous. The palace stretched endlessly, corridors lined with polished marble, ceilings adorned with intricate mosaics that seemed to whisper tales of triumph and betrayal. Servants glided silently through echoing halls, courtiers observed with curious eyes, and priests moved in slow, deliberate steps, all part of a vast theater of influence that Irene had only glimpsed in her father's stories. The wedding ceremony shimmered with ritual and grandeur. Incense swirled in golden clouds, the scent of myrrh and frankincense filling every corner. Hymns rose and fell beneath vaulted ceilings, blending with the soft clatter of ceremonial footsteps and the rustle of silks. Irene, clad in silks that shimmered like moonlight, felt the mingling of awe and resolve. She understood that her role was no mere ornamentation, She had entered a court where presence, wit, and patience were weapons, and every word or glance could shift the balance of power. In the days that followed, she observed everything with careful attention. The ministers who spoke in hushed tones, the generals whose armor gleamed under sunlight, the clergy whose prayers shaped both hearts and policy. Irene noticed how loyalty was gained and lost, how influence moved through subtle gestures, and how ambition often hid behind polite smiles. Every detail became a lesson, a piece of the map she would one day navigate with skill and determination. The birth of her son, Constantine, in the year 771, was a moment that shimmered with both joy and significance. The infant's cries echoed through the palace halls, marking not only the continuation of a dynasty, but also the subtle expansion of Irene's own role in shaping the future. The palace celebrated, yet Irene understood that motherhood in the imperial household brought not just affection but vigilance, that the life of an emperor's mother was intertwined with alliances, rivalries, and constant watchfulness. Even in moments of leisure, she absorbed lessons that would serve her later. The soft sway of candle flames in her chambers, the measured pace of palace servants, the careful protocol of audiences with courtiers, all became part of her understanding of influence and restraint. She learned the rhythm of the palace, the quiet measures of favor, the way power moved like a hidden current beneath gilded floors. As night fell over Constantinople, lanterns casting golden reflections upon the water of the Golden Horn, Irene lay awake in her chambers. She felt both the weight of expectation and the spark of possibility. From Athens to this vast city, her life had changed, and though she did not yet wear the crown, the mind of a ruler had begun to stir within her. She dreamed quietly of a future shaped by intellect, observation, and courage, a future in which a woman could claim her place at the heart of the empire. Regency under gilded strain. The palace corridors seemed taller, colder, and quieter after Leo's passing, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the absence of the emperor. Irene, now widowed yet the mother of Constantine, moved through the gilded halls with measured steps, each echo a reminder of the responsibilities that pressed upon her shoulders. The court watched her closely, some with expectation, others with suspicion, as she assumed the mantle of regent for her young son. She felt the weight of the empire in every gesture, every glance, every carefully chosen word. The regency was not granted merely out of respect for her status as mother of the emperor. It was earned through patience, intelligence, and an unspoken authority that Irene had cultivated since her arrival in Constantinople. She met ministers in their chambers, listened to generals report on distant provinces, and observed the clergy as they deliberated over sacred and secular matters alike. Every decision, every nod, every pause was a calculated act, for in a world of Byzantine intrigue, hesitation could invite challenge, and strength without wisdom could prove disastrous. The palace itself seemed alive with both possibility and threat. Mosaics glimmered in the candlelight, depicting past emperors and battles, as if reminding Irene of the continuum of power stretching across centuries. Servants whispered with careful discretion, courtiers measured their steps and their words, and ambassadors arrived with gifts meant to curry favor. Irene learned quickly that authority in Constantinople required both visibility and subtlety, that influence could be wielded as effectively through silence as through proclamation. Her relationship with the young Constantine shaped much of her early regency. The boy, small and delicate, depended upon her guidance not only in personal matters, but in understanding the burdens of the throne he was destined to inherit. Irene taught him quietly, using stories of past emperors, lessons in governance, and subtle observations of human nature. She molded not only a ruler, but also a mind capable of discerning loyalty from deceit, courage from recklessness. Yet power in Constantinople was never uncontested. Factions emerged among court officials, some seeking to influence the young emperor through his mother, others questioning her ability to govern alone. Irene responded not with anger but with precision, strengthening alliances, observing weaknesses, and using the palace's rituals and protocols to her advantage. Each day, each council meeting, each private audience became a battlefield where her intellect met ambition, strategy met caution, and the subtleties of influence were as sharp as any sword. Amidst these pressures, Irene found moments of quiet reflection. She walked through the palace gardens at dawn, the scent of blooming flowers mingling with the crisp air, the waters of the Golden Horn glinting beneath the first light. Here, she allowed herself to consider the vastness of her role, the fragile balance between guidance and control, love and necessity. In these moments, she felt the stirrings of something larger, a recognition that regency was not merely stewardship, but a rehearsal for sovereignty itself. Her regency, though fraught with tension and scrutiny, revealed her unique capacity to command respect without resorting to force. Ministers, initially cautious, began to follow her lead. Generals deferred to her judgment. Even the clergy, often impervious to secular authority, acknowledged her presence as one to be reckoned with. Every small victory, every carefully navigated crisis, reinforced the understanding that Irene's rule was not temporary, but a demonstration of the force of will she possessed. As night fell over Constantinople, the city lights shimmering on the Bosphorus, Irene would sit quietly in her chambers, Constantine sleeping nearby, contemplating the immense task she had undertaken. She felt the dual weight of ambition and duty, the intricate dance of power and vulnerability, the knowledge that the throne, while physically beyond her reach, could be shaped by the intellect and strategy she wielded. And in those quiet hours, the Empress within began to awaken, a ruler in waiting whose patience, observation, and resolve would one day demand recognition not just as mother, not just as regent, but as sovereign in her own right. Consolidation of power. The palace corridors of Constantinople shimmered with morning light, gilded mosaics reflecting the sun like distant stars. In her chambers, Irene moved with quiet certainty, each step deliberate, each glance measured, aware that the empire she sought to guide depended not on birth alone, but on perception, influence, and unyielding resolve. The regency for her son had brought her respect, but it also revealed the limitations of her authority. Whispers of doubt circulated among ministers, generals, and even distant provincial governors. Some questioned whether a woman could hold power without yielding to those who would manipulate her position. Irene listened, learned, and prepared. Her first acts of consolidation were careful, precise, and deliberate. She strengthened the loyalty of key advisors, ensuring that those who held influence over the bureaucracy, the army, and the clergy were aligned not only with her son but also with her vision of governance. Letters were sent, audiences granted, gifts exchanged, all subtle threads in a web that wove authority and allegiance together. Every decision was both a practical measure and a demonstration of her growing command, signaling to the court that Irene's influence could not be ignored. Yet consolidation of power was never purely administrative. It was performed on stages both public and private. Irene presided over ceremonies, attended councils, and met foreign envoys with the poise of one accustomed to authority. Her words, measured yet resolute, impressed observers and reminded them that even the young emperor's mother could wield influence with clarity and purpose. Diplomats took careful note of her intellect, her ability to navigate complex questions of loyalty, succession, and imperial law. In subtle ways, she shaped not only decisions but perceptions, demonstrating that power was as much about reputation as it was about decree. Meanwhile, palace intrigues continued to ripple through the halls. Factions loyal to various noble families, generals vying for position, and clerics interpreting tradition in ways that suited their own agendas tested Irene's patience and resolve. She met each challenge not with rashness but with strategy, observing carefully, noting loyalties and fractures, and acting when the moment allowed maximum effect with minimum resistance. In doing so, she revealed a central truth of rule. Authority could be asserted through intellect and timing as effectively as through armies or proclamations. The young Emperor Constantine remained a presence in her life, a symbol of legitimacy as well as a focal point of strategy. Irene guided his interactions with advisors, orchestrated his appearances, and ensured that even as he grew, the court recognized her guiding hand. She nurtured his intellect, trained his judgment, and cultivated respect for both his authority and her influence, for in shaping the emperor, she also secured her own position. Amid this consolidation, Irene was conscious of the delicate balance she maintained. Each decision carried potential peril, each word could inflame or pacify, and every action was scrutinized for hidden meaning. Yet she moved with growing confidence, aware that patience, foresight, and the careful cultivation of loyalty were the instruments through which she would transform her regency into something enduring. As night draped over the Bosphorus, lanterns flickering along the palace walls, Irene would walk through quiet gardens, the scent of night-blooming flowers mingling with the cool air. In these moments of solitude, she reflected on the path she had navigated, the subtle victories she had achieved, and the challenges that yet awaited. She felt the weight of history upon her shoulders, the quiet stirrings of ambition within her heart, and the undeniable sense that the throne, once a distant inheritance, could be claimed through courage, intellect, and unyielding resolve. And so, in the stillness of Constantinople's night, Irene's mind wove plans and possibilities, each thought a brushstroke on the canvas of her reign. The Empress in waiting was no longer simply a mother or regent. She was a ruler preparing to step forward, to assert her presence, and to bend the currents of power to her will. Claiming imperial authority. The corridors of the imperial palace, usually filled with measured voices and the soft footfalls of courtiers, seemed to hold their breath as Irene prepared to assert a new kind of presence. Constantinople itself shimmered with anticipation, the domes of Hagia Sophia catching the sun in golden arcs, the waters of the Bosphorus reflecting a sky brushed with pale blues and rose. Within the palace walls, whispers swirled as the mother of Constantine, now a skilled regent, began to move beyond stewardship toward command. The shift was subtle at first, a gesture here, a decree there, yet each action carried the weight of intention and the unmistakable assertion that power could be wielded by a woman. The early months of her transition were marked by calculated decisions. Advisors who had once debated policy cautiously, fearing the judgment of a young emperor, now found themselves responding to Irene's precise directives. Military leaders, previously hesitant, began to recognize her hand in strategic planning, her insight into supply lines, troop movements, and the intricate balance between loyalty and ambition. Even the clergy, whose opinions often shaped public perception, acknowledged her authority, carefully aligning rituals and proclamations to support her guidance. Yet authority in Constantinople was never unchallenged. Rivals and distant nobles tested her limits, questioning whether a woman could command without yielding to male influence. Irene responded with intelligence and resolve, ensuring that her decrees were just, her timing impeccable, and her presence unmistakable. She orchestrated alliances, cultivated loyalty among ministers, and positioned herself in ways that made her indispensably central to the governance of the empire. Every audience, every council meeting, every ceremonial procession became an opportunity to demonstrate competence and clarity, to show that her leadership was both deliberate and inevitable. Her son, Constantine, remained at the heart of her strategy. Though young, he symbolized legitimacy, yet it was Irene who now shaped perception, guiding his education, his public appearances, and the messages he sent to the court and provinces. In doing so, she intertwined maternal care with political acumen, using the delicate balance between family and authority to reinforce her own position. The empire, she realized, would recognize her not simply as the regent of a boy emperor, but as a ruler in her own right. The palace itself became both stage and ally. Mosaics glimmered as if applauding her strategy, marble floors echoed with measured footfalls that carried her authority, and the city beyond seemed to pulse in rhythm with her plans. Even courtiers who once doubted her began to note the subtle command in her voice, the calm decisiveness in her manner, the precision with which she balanced mercy and firmness. Irene was no longer a participant in the court's theater of politics. She was a director, quietly shaping the scenes to her advantage. And yet, the transition from regent to ruler was not only a matter of strategy, but of courage. Every action carried risk, every word could inspire loyalty or spark rebellion. Irene moved carefully, yet without hesitation, aware that history was being written in these decisions, in the delicate interplay of influence, perception, and authority. The Empress within was emerging, a sovereign whose patience, intellect, and quiet force would demand recognition. As night fell over Constantinople, the city lights reflected upon the water, lanterns glowing like scattered stars. In her private chambers, Irene contemplated the path she had traveled from Athens to this moment of unfolding power. The weight of expectation, the vigilance required, the careful orchestration of loyalty and perception, all pressed upon her, yet fueled a determination as steady as the Bosphorus tides. She understood fully and unmistakably that her reign would not be inherited, but claimed, maintained, and defended with every resource at her disposal. In those quiet hours, the Empress in waiting allowed herself a moment of reflection. She had moved beyond regency, beyond the shadows of tradition, and into a space where her intellect, strategy, and will shaped the empire's course. The crown, though not yet placed upon her head, was within reach, and the woman who had once been merely mother and consort now prepared to rule as Irene, Empress of Byzantium, in her own right. Ruthless decisions and court intrigue. The golden light of dawn spilled across Constantinople, illuminating the palace's marble floors, gilded arches, and glimmering mosaics. Within those walls, Irene moved with a quiet determination that belied the turbulence of her surroundings. The city beyond the palace gates thrummed with life, merchants calling their wares, bells from distant churches marking the hours, and the soft lapping of the Bosphorus against its stone embankments. And yet, inside, the corridors held a tension unlike the calm of any morning. For Irene's regency had evolved into the full assertion of power, and with that assertion came choices that could not be delayed, compromises that could not be softened. Threats lurked everywhere, subtle and dangerous. Courtiers who once served her loyally whispered of discontent, generals schemed quietly, and distant governors questioned the authority of a woman ruling in her own right. Each challenge was a knot in a web of politics, requiring delicate precision, patience, and at times decisive action. Irene understood that hesitation could invite disaster, that mercy could be misread as weakness, and that the stability of the empire depended on her ability to act with both clarity and force. Her first decisive moves were carefully orchestrated. Rivals were removed from positions of influence, either reassigned, monitored, or subtly sidelined. Alliances were strengthened with strategic marriages and appointments, ensuring that loyalty was rooted not in fear alone, but in recognition of her authority and skill. In every council meeting, she listened, measured, and responded with insight that left her advisors both impressed and wary. Slowly, the palace itself began to bend to her will, each gesture of compliance a testament to her growing dominance. The intricate world of court intrigue became her landscape. She navigated plots and schemes with a calm, almost dreamlike clarity, observing subtle glances, gauging hidden intentions, and deciphering the unspoken ambitions of those around her. Courtiers who thought themselves clever discovered that Irene's patience and perception outmatched their cunning. She understood that power was as much about perception as action, and she wielded it with a precision that left no doubt of her resolve. Even in the solitude of her chambers, the weight of responsibility pressed upon her. Irene contemplated the empire, the young emperor she guided, and the delicate balance between authority and ambition. She recognized that her choices, though necessary, carried consequences that would ripple through generations. And yet, she did not falter, for she understood that the crown demanded both courage and ruthlessness, that sovereignty required the willingness to act decisively when the empire's stability and her own survival were at stake. Amid this turbulence, the palace itself seemed to shift in response. Marble floors echoed her steps, tapestries seemed to frame her presence, and the mosaics of past emperors reflected a continuity of authority that reminded Irene of the weight she now carried. She moved through ceremonies and council meetings with measured elegance, her demeanor commanding attention without overt display. Even those who had once doubted her found themselves compelled to recognize her skill, her foresight, and the quiet force of her will. Night fell over Constantinople, the city lights reflecting in the waters of the Golden Horn. In the stillness, Irene allowed herself moments of reflection, aware that each decision she made, each removal, each subtle maneuver, brought the empire closer to stability, and her closer to the throne she would one day claim openly. She had transformed from mother and regent into a ruler who shaped her own destiny, navigating treachery with wisdom, patience, and determination. And so, in the quiet hours before sleep, Irene's mind moved like a river, flowing over plots, alliances, and the intricate dance of power. She had learned that to claim the throne, one must sometimes act with subtle cruelty, balancing force with strategy, vision with patience, and courage with prudence. In the soft glow of candlelight, she glimpsed the future she was creating, a future in which Irene, Empress of Byzantium, would reign with authority, intelligence, and an unyielding presence. Soul power. The morning sun spilled over Constantinople like molten gold, illuminating domes and minarets, sending flickers across the shimmering waters of the Bosphorus. Within the imperial palace, Irene moved with a confidence born of years of careful strategy, patient observation, and calculated action. No longer merely regent for her son, she now prepared to take the boldest step in her life, ruling as emperor in her own right. The city seemed to hold its breath, the mosaics of past rulers watching silently as she approached a throne that few women had dared to claim. Her declaration was not sudden, but the result of long calculation. Irene had watched the loyalties of generals, ministers, and clerics solidify under her guidance. She had removed obstacles quietly, strengthened alliances, and ensured that her authority would be recognized not through mere decree, but through the careful orchestration of support and obedience. When the moment came, she acted with measured clarity, presenting herself not as usurper, but as sovereign. The court, aware of the audacity of her claim, watched with a mixture of awe, apprehension, and reluctant respect. She adopted the title of emperor, not empress, a subtle but profound declaration that her authority was absolute, unmediated by tradition or expectation. Every gesture, every command, every ceremony reinforced this truth. Generals knelt in acknowledgement, advisors bowed their heads in deference, and the clergy adjusted their rituals to honor the woman who had rewritten the rules of the empire. Irene understood that titles alone did not confer power. It was the combination of intellect, foresight, and resolve that commanded obedience, and she embodied all three in every action. Her reign as sole empress required both vigilance and adaptability. Rivals still lurked in distant provinces, loyalists of past emperors tested boundaries, and factions within the palace sought advantage. Irene addressed each challenge with precision. Policies were enacted with care, governors were reminded of their duties, and the machinery of state functioned with the quiet efficiency of a ruler who commanded respect without needing constant assertion. Even ceremonies became instruments of authority, reinforcing her presence and shaping perception. The young Emperor Constantine, now aware of his mother's independence, remained a symbol of legitimacy, but Irene's influence shaped the empire's course. She guided him in governance, in understanding law, in navigating diplomacy, and in commanding loyalty. Every action reinforced the truth that she was not only a caretaker of power, but its rightful holder. The throne, once a distant inheritance for her son, was now an extension of her will, her intellect, and her courage. Even in private, the weight of sovereignty was both heavy and exhilarating. Irene walked the palace corridors at dawn, listening to the city awaken beneath her gaze. The scent of morning flowers mingled with the distant aroma of the sea, and in the quiet, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The path she had chosen demanded sacrifices, of ease, of certainty, of comfort, yet it had delivered her to a pinnacle of authority rarely reached by women in history. Her vision for Byzantium extended beyond mere survival or consolidation. She reformed administration, strengthened defenses, and ensured that merit, rather than lineage alone, would be recognized in governance. She ruled not only with force of will, but with intellect, foresight, and the clarity of one who understood the fragility and power of sovereignty. The empire bent beneath her hand, acknowledging her as ruler, strategist, and empress in full command. As night fell over Constantinople, the city lights shimmering on the water, Irene contemplated the journey that had brought her here, from the hills near Athens, through marriage, loss, regency, and intrigue, to this extraordinary moment of power. She understood that ruling as a woman in a world of expectation required patience, calculation, and courage beyond measure. And in the quiet of her chambers, the Empress felt the quiet thrill of triumph, knowing that she had stopped waiting, seized the throne, and claimed her place in history. Deposition and reflection. The winter winds swept across Constantinople, biting at the marble steps of the palace and rustling the evergreens in the courtyards. Within the walls that had once echoed with her decisive footsteps, Irene felt a different weight, one not of ambition or strategy, but of fragility and uncertainty. The empire she had guided with wisdom, intellect, and courage was now stirring against her. Courtiers whispered behind closed doors, generals and officials questioned her decisions, and even distant allies hesitated, uncertain if allegiance to a woman who had defied centuries of tradition remained prudent. Irene had known power could be fleeting, but never had she imagined its swiftness so sharply. After decades of navigating court intrigue, managing factions, and ruling with a steady hand, she now faced the culmination of the forces she had long anticipated but never welcomed, a movement that would remove her from the throne she had claimed so boldly. The year was 802, and history's currents were turning against her. Nikephoros, a high-ranking official with the support of the palace guard and many within the military, moved decisively. The city itself seemed to shift in response to this upheaval. Lanterns flickered uncertainly, the streets grew quieter than usual, and the echo of Irene's name carried a mixture of respect, fear, and inevitability. In the heart of the imperial palace, she walked the familiar corridors for the last time as ruler. The mosaics of emperors past, once her silent witnesses of triumph, now seemed to regard her with quiet solemnity, marking the passage of her extraordinary reign. The deposition was executed with careful precision. Guards arrived not to harm but to escort, their faces set in professional neutrality. Advisors who had once vied for her attention bowed with mixed loyalty and fear, ensuring that the transition remained orderly. Irene, calm and composed, accepted the inevitability of her fall, aware that defiance could have brought chaos not only upon herself but upon the empire she had worked so tirelessly to stabilize. She was exiled to the island of Lesbos, her journey marked by the chill of the Aegean winds and the soft lapping of waves against the ship's hull. The palace, the courts, the ceremonies, all that had been her world, receded into the distance as the vessel carried her away. Yet even in this isolation, Irene carried with her the dignity and clarity that had defined her reign. She reflected upon decades of governance, triumph, and struggle. The empire had been hers to guide, her son's ambitions had tested her resolve, and she had acted with intellect and courage at every turn. On Lesbos, in quiet chambers overlooking olive groves and the glimmering sea, Irene contemplated the nature of power. The crown she had taken, the authority she had exercised, the reforms she had enacted, all were achievements that no deposition could erase. She understood that her life's work would ripple beyond her own time, shaping the perception of female rulership in Byzantium and across the world. Though stripped of formal power, the imprint of her reign endured in the policies she had shaped, the alliances she had forged, and the very example of a woman who had stopped waiting and claimed sovereignty. Time softened the edges of exile, and Irene found solace in reflection. The hills of Athens where she was born, the palace corridors she had traversed, the intrigue she had navigated, and the triumphs she had seized, all became memories colored with wisdom, resilience, and quiet pride. She understood the thorns of the crown, the sacrifices required to hold it, and the indelible mark that true authority leaves upon history. And so, in the stillness of her final years, Irene Sarantapechaena, Empress of Byzantium, rested with a sense of completion. She had dared to rule alone, reshaped expectations, and asserted power in a world that had not been built for a woman to claim it. Her legacy was not only the throne she had taken, but the enduring testament to ambition, intelligence, and courage. A sovereign who had stopped waiting, faced challenges with relentless clarity, and left a mark that time itself could not erase. Pharaoh Cleopatra VII of Egypt, the queen who commanded empires. Ptolemaic origins and royal upbringing. In the sun-drenched city of Alexandria, where the turquoise waters of the Mediterranean kissed golden shores, a princess was born in the year 69 BCE. The palace walls shimmered with painted murals of gods and kings, the scent of frankincense drifting through high halls, and the soft murmurs of attendants marking the arrival of a new heir. Her name was Cleopatra, the seventh of her line, a child whose destiny would intertwine with empires and men, ambition and danger. Her father, Ptolemy XII Elites, ruled a kingdom steeped in both ancient Egyptian tradition and the Hellenistic legacies of Alexander the Great. The Ptolemies, Greek by blood but Egyptian in their crown and ambition, had forged a dynasty that balanced ritual, politics, and the delicate dance of foreign relations. Cleopatra's mother, though veiled in mystery, ensured that her daughter was nurtured in an environment of intellect, refinement, and awareness that survival at court demanded more than beauty, it demanded wisdom. From her earliest days, Cleopatra was immersed in languages and learning. Greek, the tongue of her lineage, echoed through the marble corridors as tutors recited history, philosophy, and mathematics. Egyptian, the language of the land she would one day rule, was whispered to her in hushed tones by servants and priests, each syllable a key to the hearts and minds of her future subjects. She learned to read the stars as guides, the Nile as both giver and taker, and the courts of men as arenas of power where alliances could flourish or crumble with a single glance. Her childhood was a delicate tapestry of privilege and vigilance. The palace gardens, where lotus flowers floated upon still waters and papyrus swayed gently in the breeze, became her refuge. She wandered among statues of gods, feeling the weight of history in every carved line. Tutors guided her hands over parchment, quills scratching lessons in rhetoric and law, while musicians filled the halls with melodies that seemed to echo the rhythm of ambition itself. Yet even amid this cultivated world, the shadow of precarious succession hung lightly. Cleopatra witnessed the rivalries of court, the subtle strategies of advisors and siblings, and the ways men and women wielded influence in both open and hidden corridors. It was not cruelty that taught her, but observation, the way courtiers bowed with one hand while clutching daggers behind their backs, the way alliances formed like shifting sands along the banks of the Nile. By the time she was a young girl, Cleopatra's mind was already alive with strategy, imagination, and calculation. She learned the delicate art of negotiation in small gestures, the power of presence in a simple glance, and the necessity of patience in a world that would not always favor a woman with ambition. Her laughter rang through the halls, light yet measured, a sound that could charm or unsettle, a first taste of the influence she would one day wield. And so, in the palace of Alexandria, amidst the hum of devotion, diplomacy, and opulence, Cleopatra grew. A child of both Greek and Egyptian worlds, her education a blend of knowledge and instinct, her awareness of the crown's burden blossoming long before she could wear it. The Nile flowed endlessly beyond the walls, a constant reminder that time moved forward, kingdoms rose and fell, and the smallest decisions could echo across continents. In those sunlit chambers and shadowed corridors, a princess learned the lessons that no throne could grant. To rule, one must understand every language, every gesture, every pulse of power. And Cleopatra, even as a girl, listened, watched, and remembered, preparing for a life that would not be given but claimed. The Ptolemaic princess, awakening to the currents that would carry her toward the crown of Egypt and beyond. Co-regency and crowning trials. The year was 57 BCE, and the palace of Alexandria shimmered with the heat of a Mediterranean sun, gilded walls casting long shadows across polished floors. Cleopatra, now a young woman of keen intellect and measured presence, faced a world of delicate balance. Her father, Ptolemy XII, had ruled with a mixture of charm, cunning, and compromise, but the tides of fortune and Rome's distant influence had left the kingdom vulnerable. Upon his death, the throne passed not to a single ruler but to a precarious co-regency. Cleopatra and her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, now shared the crown, though their shared rule was anything but harmonious. The palace, once a sanctuary of learning and music, became a stage for silent contests of power. Advisors whispered counsel with careful smiles, servants moved like shadows through holes lined with papyrus and gold, and even the Nile seemed to murmur warnings beneath its eternal flow. Cleopatra quickly understood that the crown she wore was not a simple ornament but a weight, pressing upon her with the force of expectation, intrigue, and unspoken rivalry. Her co-regent, young and easily swayed by courtiers, often followed the advice of those who feared her influence. Cleopatra, ever perceptive, navigated this delicate web with a mixture of tact and quiet assertiveness. She spoke when necessary, observed when wiser, and allowed her presence to command attention even when words were few. Every gesture, every glance, every decision became a lesson in survival and strategy. The trials of co-regency were many. Disputes over taxation, the loyalty of provincial governors, and the subtle shifts of Roman power created a constant tension within the palace. Cleopatra witnessed plots against her, rivals seeking to undermine her authority, and whispers that sought to erode her legitimacy. Yet she did not retreat. She studied her enemies with the patience of a scholar, learned the ambitions of allies and foes alike, and positioned herself as indispensable to the kingdom's stability. It was during these years that Cleopatra's talents as a diplomat and strategist truly began to shine. She spoke the languages of Egypt's citizens, Greek courtiers, and foreign envoys alike. She understood the necessity of alliances, the art of persuasion, and the subtle influence that could be exerted without force. In the flickering candlelight of her private chambers, she pored over maps of the Nile, considered the loyalty of generals, and weighed the consequences of every potential action. And through it all, she retained the allure that had quietly grown during her upbringing. Her presence at ceremonies, her measured steps through the gardens lined with lotus and papyrus, her sharp but controlled glances, all conveyed the power of a queen who understood the crown was hers not by inheritance alone, but by the will to seize it. In these co-regency years, Cleopatra learned that ruling was not merely about holding titles or performing rituals. It was about perception, intelligence, and courage. Every challenge became a test, every decision a statement of her readiness to claim full authority. The palace walls, once symbols of protection, now became arenas of trial. And Cleopatra, steady in mind and unyielding in will, proved that even the most delicate crown could be worn with deliberate force. By navigating these early trials, she began to shape not only the future of Egypt, but the legacy of a woman who would refuse to be sidelined. Each success, each carefully executed maneuver, drew her closer to the day when the throne would no longer be shared, and the Nile itself would acknowledge a queen who commanded empires through strategy, courage, and the quiet brilliance of her presence. The young pharaoh, learning that crowns are held not by chance, but by determination, foresight, and the unwavering knowledge of one's worth. Rome enters the stage. Alexandria's harbor gleamed beneath the sun, the masts of merchant ships rising like sentinels over the turquoise waters, carrying goods, messages, and rumors from distant lands. The city, a jewel of the Mediterranean, thrummed with life, and Cleopatra, now a young queen in her own right, sensed that Egypt's fate was no longer hers alone to shape. The distant echoes of Roman power, once a whisper across the sea, grew louder, and the presence of foreign ambition loomed closer with each passing year. It was 49 BCE when Julius Caesar, the Roman general whose name reverberated through the Mediterranean world, arrived on Alexandria's sunlit shores. His mission, ostensibly to settle disputes in the eastern provinces, carried with it the unmistakable weight of imperial ambition. Cleopatra, ever perceptive, understood that this was no ordinary encounter. Rome did not simply negotiate, it claimed, it demanded, it reshaped the world according to its will. The young queen devised a plan that balanced boldness with caution. Disguised in the soft folds of a rug, she was carried through the palace gates and presented herself to Caesar. The scent of papyrus, incense, and polished stone filled the chamber, mingling with the faint salt of the Mediterranean breeze. Her entrance was a spectacle of both humility and command, a calculated risk that spoke of intelligence and audacity in equal measure. Caesar, a man accustomed to conquest and persuasion, was intrigued. Cleopatra's presence was magnetic, her command of language and courtly ritual immediately evident. She spoke to him in Greek, the lingua franca of the Eastern Mediterranean elite, and revealed her understanding of Egyptian tradition and Roman politics alike. Every word, every gesture, every carefully measured pause was a declaration that she was a queen in her own right, not a pawn to be manipulated. The court, once a theater of familial rivalry, became a stage for a far larger drama. Cleopatra navigated the intricate relationships of her advisors, her brother Ptolemy XIII, and the Roman general with precision. The Nile flowed endlessly outside the palace walls, silent witness to the subtle currents of ambition, loyalty, and the fragile alliances that determined the survival of empires. Through careful negotiation, strategic flattery, and the undeniable force of her presence, Cleopatra regained her throne. Caesar's support was not unconditional, nor was it free of expectation. Yet the young queen demonstrated her mastery of both diplomacy and power, understanding that to rule Egypt meant to manipulate not only her court but the very currents of history. The streets of Alexandria buzzed with cautious optimism and anxious curiosity. Citizens watched as their queen navigated the delicate dance of Roman politics, balancing homage with sovereignty. Her reputation as a ruler of intelligence, foresight, and cunning began to spread across the Mediterranean, whispered among traders, envoys, and scholars alike. And in the quiet of her chambers, amidst the rustle of papyrus scrolls and the scent of lotus, Cleopatra reflected on the lessons Rome had brought. Empires could rise and fall like the tides of the Nile, and power demanded both vision and courage. She had claimed her place, but the path ahead was far from certain. Battles of diplomacy and ambition awaited, and the queen's mind, sharp and unyielding, would be the compass that guided Egypt through turbulent seas. The young ruler, standing at the edge of two worlds, learning that empires bow only to those who combine intellect, audacity, and the unwavering will to survive. Rise amidst the papyrus. The sun rose over Alexandria in 48 BCE, painting the harbor in molten gold and sapphire. Lotus flowers trembled on the Nile's surface, swaying as if in silent applause, while the city stirred with merchants, priests, and citizens eager to witness the unfolding drama of their queen's reign. Cleopatra, now more than ever, understood that the throne she occupied required not just presence but mastery, for every movement in the palace corridors could tilt the balance of power. Restored to full authority with Caesar's backing, Cleopatra moved through the halls of the royal palace with a new confidence. Rich tapestries lined the walls, depicting gods and ancestors, their painted eyes seeming to follow her as she passed, reminding her of the legacy she was both inheriting and reshaping. Courtiers watched in careful awe as she conducted affairs of state, her words precise, her gestures deliberate. The Nile, eternal and watchful, mirrored her reflection in its calm waters, as though acknowledging that a queen now truly ruled. Amidst the delicate dance of power, Cleopatra welcomed her son, Ptolemy 15 Caesarion, into a world of politics and destiny. The child, small and unassuming, would carry the weight of dynasties in his blood. Yet for Cleopatra, his birth was more than succession. It was a declaration that Egypt would endure, that her line, her vision, and her sovereignty would continue even amidst the storms of ambition and empire. Her influence extended beyond the palace walls. She traveled with the grace of one who understood both spectacle and strategy, parading along the Nile in barges adorned with gold and lotus, projecting both majesty and authority to her subjects. The city's residents watched as their queen, brilliant in both mind and demeanor, balanced the duality of ruler and woman, mother and sovereign, intellect and instinct. Yet the throne demanded vigilance. Court factions still murmured in hidden corners, advisors weighed the benefits of loyalty against ambition, and Rome's distant gaze lingered like the sun over the horizon, bright, imposing, and impossible to ignore. Cleopatra met these challenges with poise. She negotiated treaties, stabilized internal tensions, and demonstrated that her crown was not a ceremonial trinket, but a symbol of intellect, strategy, and unyielding will. Through the quiet hours in her chambers, Cleopatra studied maps, considered alliances, and anticipated the moves of both friends and foes. Her mind, ever restless, traced the currents of the Mediterranean, the ambitions of Roman generals, and the loyalties of Egyptian governors. Knowledge, she understood, was power, more enduring than armies or gold, and she wielded it as surely as any blade. The Nile's reeds whispered secrets beneath the evening breeze, and in those moments of solitude, Cleopatra allowed herself a rare reflection. She was no longer the young co-regent, nor merely the daughter of a dynasty. She was a ruler commanding her own destiny, a queen whose sovereignty was carved through intellect, courage, and the audacity to claim what history had not yet given. And so, beneath the golden sky and the eternal flow of the Nile, Cleopatra solidified her reign. Every decision, every gesture, every measured smile was a thread in the tapestry of power she wove. The city, the river, and the empire itself seemed to acknowledge her authority. The queen who had risen amidst the papyrus, shaping her kingdom not through inheritance alone, but through the force of vision, strategy, and the indomitable will to rule. Antony and the Eastern Alliance. The Mediterranean sky blazed with the hues of twilight in 42 BCE, as Alexandria's harbor glimmered with the reflections of ships moored along its quays. The city, vibrant with life, carried whispers of distant Roman battles, the movements of generals, and the shifting tides of power. Cleopatra, now a queen seasoned by early trials, understood that Egypt's destiny intertwined inexorably with the ambitions of Rome. Into this delicate web of politics sailed Mark Antony, one of Rome's most formidable leaders, a man of both intellect and martial prowess. His presence was a challenge, a risk, and a chance. Cleopatra, versed in diplomacy and strategy, met him with a mixture of audacity and grace. Her entrance upon the barge, adorned with gilded sails, silken banners, and the scent of myrrh and frankincense, was as much a declaration as a greeting. The Nile seemed to part in quiet acknowledgement, the river's waters catching the last rays of sun as if to salute her command. Their meeting was a delicate dance of intellect, charm, and calculated vulnerability. Cleopatra, fluent in multiple languages, engaged Antony in conversation that wove history, politics, and subtle persuasion. Each word, each glance, was measured to both enthrall and assert. In the corridors of the palace, courtiers watched silently, aware that the unfolding alliance carried consequences far beyond Egypt's borders. The Eastern Alliance was not born of romance alone. It was a union of necessity, of strategy, and of power. Cleopatra's influence shaped Antony's vision of the East, guiding him in matters of Egyptian governance, economy, and military alignment. Together, they navigated treacherous waters, rebellions, rival Roman factions, and the ever-watchful gaze of Octavian across the sea. Within the palace, Alexandria pulsed with the energy of ambition. Festivals celebrated the queen's rule, yet every smile masked calculation, every gesture measured against the whims of politics. Cleopatra's presence was magnetic, a constant reminder that she commanded not merely loyalty, but awe. Her intellect and poise elevated Egypt's voice in the Mediterranean, and through her alliance with Antony, she wielded influence that rivaled the great empires themselves. Yet power bore its thorns. Court intrigue, jealousy, and the burden of expectation pressed upon her relentlessly. Cleopatra, ever strategic, balanced public display with private deliberation, understanding that one misstep could unravel the delicate fabric of her reign. In her chambers, surrounded by scrolls, maps, and the quiet rustle of papyrus, she planned, predicted, and prepared. Each alliance was a move in a grand chess game, each decision a test of both courage and foresight. The Nile's steady flow mirrored Cleopatra's resolve, carrying her through both triumphs and the shadows of looming conflict. Every victory and every negotiation was a testament to her unyielding will. She was no longer merely a daughter of the Ptolemaic line. She was a queen who shaped empires, commanded armies, and held the gaze of one of Rome's greatest generals. And so, beneath the Mediterranean sun and the watchful stars of night, Cleopatra's influence spread. Her reign, strengthened through alliance and audacity, left no doubt. Empires could bend to her vision, and the crown she wore was not a gift, but a prize claimed through intelligence, courage, and indomitable will. The queen who commanded not only Egypt but the currents of history, preparing her kingdom for challenges that would test the very fabric of her power. Clash of Empires. The winds of the Mediterranean shifted in 41 BCE, carrying whispers of distant battlefields and the relentless ambitions of men far beyond Egypt's sunlit shores. Alexandria's streets, once alive with the music of merchants and the scent of lotus, now hummed with anxious anticipation. Cleopatra, queen and strategist, felt the weight of empires pressing upon her, the shadows of Rome stretching ever closer, and the inexorable gaze of Octavian, the rising Roman power, testing her every move. Her alliance with Mark Antony had brought strength, yet it also invited peril. Letters, reports, and envoys arrived daily, bearing news of Roman rivalries, political scheming, and the precarious balance of power that could shift in a single night. Cleopatra's mind, ever vigilant, weighed every word, every gesture, every subtle signal from friend and foe alike. She understood that her throne, brilliant and gleaming, was also a fragile thing. The palace, with its gilded columns, polished floors, and gardens of lotus and papyrus, became a theater of strategy. Courtiers moved like shadows along corridors, their intentions masked beneath smiles and measured words. Cleopatra observed them all with the keen perception that had become her hallmark. She negotiated with generals, counseled Antony, and maintained the loyalty of her people, all while knowing that the empire's future rested on her ability to navigate Rome's tangled ambitions. Every day brought new challenges. Provincial governors tested her authority, factions in the court questioned her counsel, and Rome's envoys measured her responses for weakness. Cleopatra met each test with grace, intellect, and the quiet ferocity of one who knew that power demanded vigilance as well as vision. The Nile, flowing eternally outside her windows, mirrored her resolve, its waters steady even as the world around her trembled with uncertainty. Her alliance with Antony grew stronger, tempered by both necessity and respect. Together, they coordinated strategies, managed territories, and projected the might of their combined influence across the Mediterranean. Cleopatra, however, knew that their partnership, while formidable, also made her a target. Octavian's ambitions could not be ignored, and the shadow of war hung over every negotiation, every festival, every carefully orchestrated display of royal authority. Even within the palace, tension simmered. Advisors debated strategy, soldiers whispered rumors, and every smile or bow could conceal treachery. Cleopatra moved with calculated elegance, her presence commanding attention without force, her intelligence guiding every decision. She was a queen who had risen not by inheritance alone, but through foresight, audacity, and the steady cultivation of influence. And yet, beneath the brilliance of her rule, a quiet understanding settled over her. The Nile's waters, constant and deep, reminded her that power was never permanent, and that vigilance must never waver. Cleopatra faced the looming threat of Rome not with panic, but with measured determination. Every alliance, every council, every calculated risk was a step toward securing Egypt's sovereignty against the encroaching shadows. As twilight fell over Alexandria, painting the city in gold and crimson, Cleopatra stood on the palace balcony. The river reflected the last rays of the sun, and the air carried the scent of lotus and salt from the sea. She knew the coming days would test not only her intellect but her courage, and that the throne she had claimed must be defended with both strategy and the quiet force of will that had guided her from the beginning. The queen, unbowed and resolute, standing against the shadows of Rome, preparing for the trials that would determine the fate of empires. Twilight of the Pharaoh. The heat of the Egyptian summer in 30 BCE pressed down upon Alexandria, the sun turning the harbor's waters to molten gold, and the air heavy with the scent of salt, lotus, and the distant perfume of incense from the palace temples. Cleopatra, Queen of the Nile, moved through her city with the poise of one accustomed to both admiration and peril. Every step, every gesture, carried the weight of a kingdom, the legacy of her ancestors, and the awareness that the tides of history now bent around her choices. Her alliance with Mark Antony had brought glory and challenge alike. Together, they commanded armies, controlled territories stretching across the eastern Mediterranean, and wove strategies that intertwined Egypt's fate with Rome's turbulent politics. Yet Octavian's shadow loomed ever closer, a constant reminder that even the strongest alliance could falter, and that empires could be lost with a single stroke of ambition or miscalculation. The city of Alexandria, alive with merchants, scholars, and courtiers, seemed both vibrant and tense under her gaze. Festivals and ceremonies continued, as if to reassure the people that their queen's hand remained steady. Cleopatra navigated each public appearance with intelligence and subtlety, projecting majesty while assessing the loyalty and intentions of those around her. The Nile's slow, eternal flow mirrored her patience, its waters steady even as the currents of war approached. As Roman forces advanced, Cleopatra's mind worked tirelessly. She coordinated defenses, negotiated with allies, and sought to maintain the loyalty of both her subjects and Antony's supporters. Every decision was a blend of intellect, intuition, and the audacity that had carried her from a co-regent to a ruler commanding the attention of the Mediterranean world. She understood that power was as much about perception as it was about force. The Battle of Actium drew near, a clash that would determine the fates of nations. Cleopatra watched the preparations, her heart steady yet alert, knowing that the outcome could either secure her kingdom's sovereignty or unravel the legacy she had built. The ships glimmered in the sun like a floating city, sails catching the wind, oars cutting through water that reflected both the brilliance and fragility of human ambition. In the quiet moments, away from the tumult of strategy and counsel, Cleopatra reflected on her reign. She had risen through intellect, courage, and unyielding will. She had reclaimed her throne, formed alliances, and held the gaze of history itself. Yet she knew that absolute power carried its perils, and that the crown she wore, heavy with gold and responsibility, demanded sacrifices that could not be measured by triumph alone. As night fell over Alexandria, the city's lights shimmering like stars mirrored upon the Nile, Cleopatra contemplated the choices ahead. Each move, each alliance, each confrontation was a gambit on the chessboard of empires. She was a queen who had taken her throne, commanded empires, and held the currents of history in her hand. Yet the edge of destiny was sharp, and the cost of power remained ever present. The wind whispered through the papyrus reeds along the riverbank, carrying with it the promise of challenge and the quiet hum of possibility. Cleopatra stood at the palace balcony, her gaze sweeping over the city, the river, and the horizon beyond. She would meet history with intellect, courage, and the unshakable resolve that had defined her reign. The queen who commanded empires from the edge, a sovereign who knew that to hold power is to risk everything, and that the ultimate gambit of history awaited her with both danger and destiny. Immortal Queen of the Nile. The sun hung low over Alexandria in 30 BCE, casting long shadows across the palace walls and glimmering upon the Nile's gentle currents. The city, once alive with triumph and ceremony, now held a quieter, tense air. Cleopatra moved through the marble halls, every step measured, every glance calculated, aware that the final act of her reign had arrived. The weight of empires pressed upon her shoulders, yet she carried herself with the dignity of a queen who had risen through intellect, courage, and indomitable will. The aftermath of Actium left the eastern Mediterranean trembling. Roman legions advanced, and Mark Antony's forces had been decimated. Yet Cleopatra, undaunted, prepared to face the tide of history with the same strategic mind that had guided her since youth. She negotiated, rallied loyal followers, and sought to preserve what she could of her kingdom. Each decision was a blend of pragmatism and audacity, as she navigated the collapse of alliances and the ever-approaching certainty of Octavian's conquest. Within the palace, whispers of fear and loyalty intertwined. Advisors and courtiers watched their queen, some in hope, others in apprehension, knowing that her choices could determine the survival of Egypt itself. Cleopatra's mind, restless and precise, charted every option, weighed every risk, and prepared for the moment when strategy must yield to inevitability. The Nile flowed endlessly beneath her window, a mirror to her steady resolve even as the world shifted beneath her feet. Mark Antony, defeated and despairing, returned to Alexandria. Cleopatra's reunion with him was tinged with both tenderness and urgency. They shared the heavy knowledge that their time had dwindled, that the throne they had defended so fiercely could not withstand the might of Rome. Yet even in the shadow of defeat, Cleopatra remained composed, her gaze steady, her mind calculating. She had faced threats, intrigue, and the ambitions of empires, and she would face this moment with the same courage that had guided her from the beginning. The days that followed were marked by preparation, both for survival and for the dignity of a queen. Letters were sent, alliances called upon, and Egypt's treasures preserved. Cleopatra ensured that her legacy would not vanish entirely, that her name would endure through the generations, even if her throne could not. As the fateful day arrived, Cleopatra took the steps that would seal her destiny. She chose to meet history on her own terms, to preserve her dignity, her legacy, and the essence of the sovereign she had become. In her chambers, adorned with gilded scrolls, fragrant oils, and the soft rustle of papyrus, she reflected on the years that had brought her here. Every triumph, every alliance, every challenge faced with courage and intellect, all converged into this quiet, solemn moment. Her final moments, though shrouded in sadness, were marked by clarity and resolve. Cleopatra ensured that her children, her vision, and the memory of her reign would endure, even as empires shifted and Rome asserted its dominance. The Nile's eternal flow mirrored her enduring influence, a reminder that while crowns may fall, the mark of a ruler who dared to command empires can never be erased. And so, beneath the golden twilight of Alexandria, Cleopatra's reign came to its close. She had commanded empires, shaped the currents of history, and risen above expectations to claim her throne. Though the dynasty's twilight had arrived, her legacy remained luminous, an echo of intellect, courage, and unyielding will. The queen who commanded empires, who faced the edge of history with unwavering resolve, and whose name would be remembered long after the Nile's waters had carried away the last echoes of her reign. Zetian of China, the woman who became emperor. Tang dynasty beginnings. Morning light unfurled across the distant hills of Wanshui, brushing the valleys in gold and amber, while a soft breeze carried the delicate scent of cypress and wildflowers. It was in this quiet corner of the Tang realm, in 642 CE, that Wu Zhao entered the world, a girl whose mind and presence would one day leave an indelible mark upon the empire. Her family, of modest official standing but respected for wisdom and integrity, welcomed her with careful hope, never imagining that this child would rise to challenge the boundaries placed upon women in a society ruled by men. From her earliest days, her eyes observed with unusual intensity, noting gestures, expressions, and the subtle rhythms of conversation, as if she were quietly measuring the world and her place within it. Her father, Wu Shihua, a man valued for prudence and intellect, devoted himself to her education, guiding her through the classics, historical texts, poetry, and philosophical thought. Her mother, Lady Yang, emphasized propriety, patience, and the delicate balance of humility and assertion. Together, they shaped a foundation of knowledge, decorum, and discernment that would become Wu Zhao's most formidable tools in the years to come. Even as a small child, she understood that influence was earned through strategy, observation, and patience, and that intellect could be as powerful as wealth or status. Her early days were filled with the gentle rhythms of nature, wandering among bamboo groves, tracing patterns in streams, and listening to the distant chants of traveling monks who drifted along the hillsides. These experiences honed her attention, teaching her the value of careful observation, subtle inference, and quiet patience. Play was never mere amusement. It became a subtle training ground where she learned to notice the smallest details of human behavior, to weigh action against consequence, and to store knowledge like seeds for the future. As she grew older, her education expanded beyond reading and memorization into calligraphy, music, and poetry. She absorbed the cadence of language, the power of well-chosen words, and the influence of presence in conversation. Through family networks, she learned stories of Chang'an, the imperial capital, with its marble halls, lantern-lit corridors, and the intricate choreography of ministers, generals, and emperors. These distant visions stirred both awe and quiet ambition within her, hinting at a life beyond the hills of Shui and the limitations imposed on girls of her station. Even amid these glimpses of a larger world, her childhood retained tenderness, sunlight glimmering on the rivers, laughter shared with siblings, the mingling aromas of incense, cooking fires, and the earth after rain. Such moments grounded her, nurturing patience, resilience, and endurance alongside curiosity and intelligence. She came to understand that ambition required not only desire but also subtlety, foresight, and unwavering composure. And so, Wu Zhao's journey began quietly, in the gentle hills and sunlit streams of Shui. A girl of remarkable intelligence, keen observation, and latent ambition, slowly absorbing the lessons of life, manners, and power. Little did the world know, the empire's future ruler was awakening, preparing to ascend a path fraught with both opportunity and peril. The hills whispered her promise, the rivers reflected her first dreams, and the morning wind carried the faint stirrings of a destiny that would one day reshape the Tang dynasty. First steps in the Forbidden Halls. The journey to Chang'an, the sprawling capital of the Tang dynasty, unfolded like a dream in motion. Caravans wound along sunlit roads, the distant mountains etched against pale skies, while Wu Zhao, now a young girl of keen awareness and curiosity, traveled with her family toward a world both dazzling and perilous. The imperial city shimmered in her imagination long before her eyes first beheld its grandeur. Walls of white stone, tiled roofs glinting like jade, lanterns swaying above wide avenues where courtiers and officials moved with measured grace. Even as the carriage rolled forward, she observed everything: the meticulous folding of banners, the way attendants bowed to passing officials, the subtle gestures of deference and command. Each detail became a lesson, a small insight into the art of power she would one day master. Upon arrival at the palace, Wu Zhao was introduced to the Forbidden Halls, where golden screens caught the sunlight, and marble floors reflected the measured footsteps of those who held sway over the empire's fate. The air inside carried a mixture of incense, polished wood, and the faint tang of oils used to preserve silk tapestries. Here, every gesture, every glance, every word was weighted with meaning. Wu Zhao, despite her youth, quickly understood that this world required observation and patience above all else. Courtiers whispered in corridors, generals strode through courtyards with stern faces, and ministers exchanged subtle nods that conveyed alliances and rivalries alike. Each movement, each conversation, was a fragment of a larger tapestry she was just beginning to comprehend. Her early days at court were a careful balancing act. Tutors instructed her not only in letters, poetry, and history, but also in the subtleties of etiquette, the cadence of speech, and the power of silence. Even meals, shared in gilded halls beneath painted ceilings, became an exercise in reading intentions. Wu Zhao watched her peers and superiors alike, noting who laughed too loudly, who lingered with eyes sharp and calculating, and who spoke with measured care, each observation stored within her memory for the days to come. Amid this splendor, Wu Zhao remained grounded by her family's guidance. Her father reminded her of prudence, of patience, of the power of listening before speaking. Her mother emphasized dignity and the careful cultivation of presence, teaching that in a court designed for men, subtlety and intelligence were often mightier than sword or decree. And slowly, Wu Zhao's awareness of her own potential began to bloom. She realized that influence was not given, it was observed, earned, and subtly claimed. Even as she walked through corridors of power that smelled faintly of lacquer, candle smoke, and perfumed silk, Wu Zhao's imagination wandered to the hills of Wanshui. There she had learned patience and observation, lessons that now became indispensable as she navigated the grandeur and treachery of the palace. Each day brought encounters with officials whose ambition rivaled her own, each audience a lesson in strategy, every whispered counsel a chance to measure allies and adversaries. Thus, Wu Zhao took her first steps in the forbidden halls, not as a simple court lady, but as a girl who understood the rhythms of power, the necessity of foresight, and the patience required to survive and eventually command an empire. With every measured bow, every polite word, and every quiet observation, she inched closer to the throne that awaited a woman bold enough, clever enough, and patient enough to claim it. Chang'an, with its glittering walls and murmuring courtyards, became the canvas upon which Wu Zhao would begin to paint the contours of her destiny, one careful step at a time. Rise under Emperor Gaozong. The court of Emperor Gaozong shimmered with golden light, red lacquered beams reflecting the sun that poured through latticed windows, while the faint aroma of sandalwood incense curled through the corridors. Wu Zhao, now a young woman of remarkable intellect and presence, moved through these halls with careful grace, her steps measured, her gaze steady. It was here, amidst the echoes of ceremonial drums and the meticulous rituals of the Tang court, that she began to understand the delicate dance of influence and survival. Every gesture carried weight, every word could shift alliances, and every smile could hide ambition. Her entrance into Emperor Gaozong's orbit was subtle, yet deliberate. The emperor, recently ascended, was both powerful and frail, a ruler whose health left room for intrigue and whose curiosity made him attentive to those who could offer counsel. Wu Zhao, with her extraordinary education, fluency in literature, history, and poetry, and her keen awareness of human behavior, began to attract attention. She spoke when needed, listened when prudent, and allowed her intelligence to shine quietly in the background. Each conversation was an exercise in patience and strategy, a rehearsal for a future where subtlety would be survival. Within the palace, she observed the intricate hierarchy of concubines, officials, and generals. Alliances formed like the delicate weaving of silk threads, some strong, some fragile, and some poised to snap under pressure. Wu Zhao learned quickly that influence was not merely proximity to power, but the ability to perceive ambition, fear, and loyalty in equal measure. She cultivated favor through insight, offering counsel at opportune moments, supporting the emperor in matters of state, and presenting herself as both learned and discreet. Her reputation for intelligence and decorum began to grow, and with it, a quiet authority that reached beyond her official station. During this time, Wu Zhao's ambition took root alongside her awareness of court fragility. She understood the precariousness of women's positions in the palace, the ease with which favor could turn to dismissal, and the permanence of reputation, good or ill. Yet she also sensed opportunity, A woman of intellect, patience, and foresight could guide policy, shape decisions, and wield influence even without the title of Empress. She began to see that the path to power was neither immediate nor violent, but deliberate, measured, and meticulously prepared. The emperor, intrigued by her counsel and captivated by her presence, began to rely upon her in matters of both state and strategy. She learned the rhythm of imperial decision-making, the subtle pressures of administration, and the human frailties that could influence an empire's course. Wu Zhao's skill lay in her ability to navigate these challenges while remaining unseen as a threat, a shadow of guidance that nonetheless moved the court's machinery in quiet, effective ways. Amid ceremonial banquets and discussions of military campaigns, Wu Zhao honed her understanding of loyalty, diplomacy, and influence. She watched rivals closely, learned from missteps of others, and cultivated allies among scholars, generals, and ministers. Each day brought lessons in patience and calculation, reinforcing that authority could be earned through subtle guidance rather than overt confrontation. By the end of these years, Wu Zhao had transformed from an observant young woman into a master of court politics, skilled in strategy and aware of the delicate threads that held an empire together. She had begun to lay the foundation for the most extraordinary rise in Chinese history, moving carefully but with intent toward a throne few believed a woman could claim. Guardian of the Throne. The Tang court hummed with life, a constant ebb of ceremony, council, and carefully measured ambition. Wu Zhao, now a figure of growing influence, stood closer to the emperor than most could dare, her presence quiet yet undeniable. Emperor Gaozong, whose health was often frail, relied increasingly on her judgment, valuing her insight in matters of governance and succession. The palace corridors echoed with the clatter of officials and courtiers, but Wu Zhao moved through them like a river, calm, deliberate, and observant. Each day brought decisions that could sway the empire's fortunes, and she had learned to read the currents of power with unmatched skill. As Gaozong's confidant, Wu Zhao became a guardian of the throne, protecting not only the emperor's rule but the stability of the dynasty itself. Factions within the court vied for favor, ministers plotted in quiet chambers, and generals measured loyalty in the tension of their eyes. Wu Zhao navigated this web with poise, lending her counsel to resolve disputes, avert crises, and subtly guide decisions in ways that secured both the emperor and her own growing authority. Her influence was invisible to those outside her inner circle, yet it was felt in every decree, every appointment, and every military campaign. Her understanding of human nature became her greatest tool. She observed ambition, fear, and jealousy with the precision of a scholar and the subtlety of a courtier. Allies were cultivated with care, rivals managed with patience, and those who underestimated her intelligence were quietly unbalanced. In moments of imperial hesitation, her voice carried not arrogance, but clarity, a calm current steering decisions toward stability and continuity. She had become indispensable, the unseen hand that preserved order while the court churned with ambition. Yet her vigilance came at a cost. Every moment required calculation, every word weighed for implication. The boundaries between personal loyalty and political necessity blurred, and Wu Zhao became ever aware that power, even when guided by intelligence and patience, demanded sacrifice. She watched as others faltered, as rivalries threatened to overturn carefully laid plans, and she understood that one misstep could erase years of influence. Still, she persisted. The emperor's trust grew, and with it, Wu Zhao's confidence in her capacity to shape the empire's course. Her role as guardian of the throne was not a title written on parchment, but a lived reality, a delicate balance of strategy, foresight, and measured intervention. Every decree she influenced, every counsel she offered, every alliance she nurtured brought her closer to the ultimate prize, a throne that had never before been claimed by a woman. In the hush of the evening, as the lanterns flickered against carved wooden panels and the corridors of the forbidden halls fell quiet, Wu Zhao would walk alone, contemplating the weight of the empire upon her mind. The Tang dynasty thrived in her hands, even if subtly, and she recognized that the crown she sought was not merely a symbol of authority, but the culmination of years of vigilance, intellect, and patience. And so, as the palace slept, the woman who would become emperor remained awake in thought, guarding the throne not with sword or decree, but with unmatched strategy, foresight, and the quiet power of intelligence fully realized. Architect of loyalty. The Tang court was a web of delicate allegiances, shifting ambitions, and hidden tensions. Wu Zetian, now seasoned in the rhythm of imperial life, began to shape not only policy but the very structure of loyalty within the palace. She understood that power alone was insufficient. To truly secure her influence, she needed a network of steadfast allies, officials and generals who would follow her guidance without question, even when their eyes never met hers. Every gesture, every counsel, every carefully chosen word became a tool to forge bonds that would withstand intrigue, rivalry, and the uncertainties of imperial favor. She moved quietly through the corridors of the forbidden halls, observing the interactions of courtiers, reading the subtle signs of allegiance, noting who bowed with sincerity and who merely performed a courtesy. In audiences with Emperor Gaozong, she began to recommend ministers and officials whose loyalty could be relied upon, fostering networks of support that extended beyond the public eye. She nurtured trust carefully, offering guidance and counsel that built reputation while exposing weakness where necessary. The palace was alive with conversation, yet Wu Zetian's mind worked in the stillness, plotting the threads of connection that would one day secure her ascent. Her understanding of loyalty was both practical and profound. She knew that fear alone could not sustain obedience, nor could charm or beauty. Influence had to be reinforced through recognition, opportunity, and the subtle art of reward. Scholars found their works praised, generals saw their campaigns supported, and servants noted the care with which she attended to the household and ceremonial functions. Each act created a ripple of gratitude and dependence, a lattice of ties that bound the empire's administrators closer to her will. Yet Wu Zetian was cautious. She avoided overt displays of authority that could provoke jealousy or suspicion. Even as she strengthened bonds, she measured her presence carefully, allowing others to shine in public while her guidance shaped the outcomes behind the scenes. In this way, loyalty was not coerced but cultivated, a silent yet enduring force that promised to support her ambitions when the time came. Her personal interactions were equally strategic. Courtiers learned to speak openly before her, knowing she listened with intelligence and discretion. She rewarded competence and foresight, quietly marginalized those whose ambition threatened the balance of the court, and created a sense of order that belied the chaos swirling within the empire's political heart. Every day was a lesson in influence, every meeting a chance to strengthen the lattice of loyalty that would one day uphold her authority. Amid these quiet maneuvers, Wu Zetian continued to learn. She observed rivalries, anticipated shifts in the emperor's favor, and studied the patterns of obedience and ambition that governed the Tang dynasty's elite. Her growing network became a reflection of her mind, structured, disciplined, and capable of withstanding turbulence. She understood that to maintain control over a dynasty unaccustomed to female rule, she would need more than intelligence. She would need a loyal foundation that spanned the empire, built carefully, deliberately, and without haste. And so, within the gilded walls and echoing chambers of Chang'an, Wu Zetian quietly became the architect of loyalty, mastering the subtle, unspoken power that would one day carry her to the throne and beyond. Woman on the Throne. The palace of Chang'an, once filled with the murmurs of ministers and the careful choreography of courtly life, now seemed to hum with a new energy. Wu Zetian, long the architect of influence and loyalty, stepped forward to claim authority in ways the empire had never witnessed. Emperor Gaozong's health had weakened further, and the reins of governance increasingly rested in her hands. Yet she did not seize power recklessly. Every decision, every decree, every word issued in the emperor's name was calculated, deliberate, and a reflection of her unyielding intellect. With each passing month, Wu Zetian demonstrated that authority was more than a title. It was an understanding of the empire's needs, a mastery of its networks, and the ability to act decisively when circumstances demanded. Her influence shaped taxation, law, military appointments, and the balance of court factions. She met challenges not with fear or hesitation, but with foresight, managing crises with a precision that startled even the most seasoned ministers. The empire became her stage, and her strategies unfolded with a quiet inevitability, each move strengthening her position while maintaining the semblance of continuity. Yet power brought scrutiny. Every action was weighed, every decree interpreted, and rival factions within the palace grew restless, wary of her rise. Wu Zetian recognized that the path she walked was narrow and perilous. To maintain her position, she needed not only skill but courage, patience, and the unwavering loyalty she had spent years cultivating. She had learned the rhythms of fear and favor, the subtle balances of power that could protect a ruler who dared to be unlike any who had come before. Even within her personal quarters, Wu Zetian's life reflected the weight of her authority. Nights were spent poring over state documents, studying reports of military campaigns, and writing letters that guided the empire's administration. The tranquility of the gardens, the flicker of lanterns along winding corridors, and the rustle of silk in empty halls offered quiet moments of reflection. She thought of the Tang dynasty not only as a realm to be governed, but as a legacy to be shaped, one that would remember a woman who ruled with clarity, intellect, and force of will. Her ascension as the woman on the throne was both subtle and absolute. No single proclamation marked the moment. Instead, it was a gradual recognition, a weaving of authority through every facet of imperial life. Officials followed her counsel as if it were law, Generals executed campaigns with her strategy guiding them, and the empire itself began to bend, almost imperceptibly, to her vision. She ruled not merely as a placeholder for a sick emperor, but as a sovereign force capable of reshaping the Tang world. And so, as dawn spilled its gold across the palace rooftops, Zetian walked through the halls with quiet command. Each step resonated with the promise of power seized through intellect and strategy. Every whisper of support, every glance of acknowledgement, every silent act of obedience solidified the reality. She was no longer behind the throne, she was the force shaping it. The Tang reimagined. With Emperor Gaozong's passing, the halls of Chong'an seemed at once familiar and transformed. Zetian, now the uncontested sovereign, moved through the corridors not as a consort or regent, but as a ruler whose will shaped every corner of the empire. The Tang dynasty, long a tapestry of inherited privilege, factional politics, and tradition, began to bend and shimmer under her guidance. Policies, previously constrained by precedent and patriarchal expectation, were reshaped with her clarity of vision, emphasizing merit over birth, talent over lineage, and loyalty over ceremony. Zetian's vision extended beyond the administrative machinery. She invested in education, patronage of the arts, and religious institutions that reinforced both her legitimacy and the cultural vitality of the Tang. Temples were restored, scholars supported, and the empire's intellectual and spiritual life flourished. Yet she never lost sight of the practical demands of sovereignty. Military campaigns were carefully planned, trade routes protected, and foreign envoys treated with respect, ensuring that the empire remained both strong and admired. Yet transformation drew resistance. Traditionalists whispered behind silken screens, skeptical of a woman's capacity to guide an empire. Courtiers tested her patience, generals assessed her resolve, and provincial governors measured their loyalty. Zetian faced each challenge with the same quiet authority she had honed over decades. She met opposition not with rashness, but with strategy, balancing firmness with diplomacy, rewarding those who served faithfully and sidelining those whose ambition threatened her vision. Within the palace, her influence extended to the youngest pages and senior ministers alike. Each interaction was an opportunity to shape perception, inspire loyalty, and guide the empire toward her ideals. The Tang dynasty's bureaucracy became a living testament to her intelligence, a system that mirrored her understanding of human nature and the delicate balance of power. She demonstrated that governance was not only about issuing commands, but about cultivating the structures, the minds, and the hearts that would carry her vision forward. Amid the gardens and quiet corridors, Zetian often reflected on the empire she now commanded. The Huangshan Mountains in the distance, the gentle flow of the Wei River, and the soft rustle of leaves reminded her of both the beauty and fragility of the realm. Every law enacted, every alliance secured, every scholar encouraged was part of the tapestry she wove, a Tang dynasty reimagined through the mind of a woman who had seized, held, and transformed power. And so the empire moved under her hand like a great river, steady yet unstoppable, its currents guided by intellect, determination, and the careful orchestration of loyalty and strategy. Zetian, the woman who had risen from concubine to Empress Regnant, had not only claimed the throne but had remade the Tang in her image, ensuring that history would remember the dynasty not merely for its rulers, but for the brilliance of the sovereign who dared to lead it. Lessons of the Dragon Throne. Years of ruling had etched both wisdom and caution into Wu Zetian's presence. The court of Chang'an, once skeptical and constrained by tradition, now moved in rhythm with her decisions, each action reflecting decades of careful calculation and unwavering resolve. She had faced rival factions, familial tension, and the weight of a male-dominated bureaucracy, yet she had survived, thrived, and transformed the empire into a reflection of her vision. Still, the Dragon Throne, while hers, was a seat of constant vigilance. Her reign had not been free of sacrifice. Allies had been lost, rivals defeated, and decisions taken that weighed heavily upon her conscience. The lives touched by her policies, the fates altered by her commands, and the ambitions stifled or nurtured within her court were reminders that the exercise of power came entwined with responsibility. Wu Zetian understood that to hold an empire as vast and complex as the Tang required both heart and steel, and that her legacy would be measured not only by triumphs, but by the endurance of the state itself. Even in the quiet of her private quarters, she reflected on the lessons of leadership she had learned through fire and strategy. To rule was to balance mercy with authority, to reward loyalty and temper ambition, to perceive subtle shifts in allegiance and act with clarity before disorder could take root. She had seen that history remembered not the timid, but those willing to claim their destiny with courage, resolve, and careful calculation. The Tang dynasty had been remade under her hand. Administration was more meritocratic, governance more strategic, and the empire's influence extended across East Asia. Scholars, poets, generals, and diplomats carried her vision into every corner of the realm. And yet, she also understood that power was never permanent, that empires rise and fall, and that every ruler leaves behind lessons as fragile as they are enduring. In the stillness of the evening, lantern light flickering along the corridors, Wu Zetian walked through the palace with the weight of years of triumph and vigilance pressing upon her shoulders. Her mind was alive with plans, memories, and reflections. The lessons of the Dragon Throne were clear. Authority demanded intelligence, courage, and the relentless pursuit of vision. And though her body would one day leave the throne, the legacy she had forged, the empire she had guided, the structure she had strengthened, and the history she had altered, would endure. As the moon rose over Chang'an, casting silver across the palace rooftops, the woman who had become emperor, who had seized power in a world unprepared for her, and who had shaped an entire dynasty with will and intellect, rested at last. The Dragon Throne remained hers in memory and in history, a testament to a life lived boldly, wisely, and unflinchingly in pursuit of sovereignty.